Hi, and welcome to today's webinar, The Ransomware Epidemic, an end-to-end look at the #1 cyber threat. Well, I'm really excited today. We have a truly all-star lineup. With me today are Mike Hague, Director of Advanced Threat Detection Research at Red Canary, and Jameson Utter, Vice President and Cyber Researcher at Senrio. I'm your moderator, Ben Johnson. I was co-founder of Carbon Black and am working on my next move in the cyberspace right now. And from a personal note, let me say that Jameson and Mike are truly awesome guys, truly awesome cyber brains, cyber experts. And getting them together on the same webinar is really cool, in my opinion. Sorry for being so personal here. But they also work for two great cyber companies, Red Canary and Senrio. So really excited to hear what they have to say. First, a little housekeeping. All registrants and attendees will receive a copy of the webinar slides and the recording after the webinar. And please feel free to ask questions in the BrightTalk system. We'll get to Q&A at the end. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jameson for the first part of this webinar.
Awesome. So what I wanted to start with is I did a bit of a research project over a few years to understand ransomware. I wanted to get beyond the idea of technical hacks or how-tos and really get into the mind of why people do it. So what I'd start with is really the preposition is why people begin ransomware. And some of it is really the reason why people invest money. So what I started with was the return on investment. I went out to see what different investment opportunities I had in the world and how I could make more money. Things like money markets, pay a limited amount, 0.5%. CDs pay pretty limited, 1.5%. None of these ways are places to make money. Even the stock market isn't nearly as profitable as things like cybercrime. So today I'm going to tell you about an opportunity that I have that can return about 1,400% return on investment. It has nothing to do with Amway. It has everything to do with using and leveraging cybercrime to make money. And the idea here is I want to show you why the industry continues to grow and why it's in fact an industry and not just a random threat. So the first thing is about the cost of entry. I actually built this ransomware campaign from the ground up. And by that, what I mean is I actually invested all of the Bitcoin and dollars into building it step by step because I wanted to understand the process. Part of my process was not doing any technical hacks. It was actually buying it all as a service. So in that process, I had to learn, first of all, where to go, who to talk to, and how to acquire all the things necessary. So I began with the payload. And in the payload of it is the actual crypto, right? So this would be the Locky, CryptoLocker, CryptoWall. CryptoWall was actually the family I bought into. In my case, the investment for the payload was $3,000, or at that time it was actually 10 Bitcoin. Bitcoin was much cheaper than it is now. Knowing the price today, I wish I had maybe hung on to that Bitcoin. But I paid $3,000 for it, and I'll get a little bit more into why it was so expensive or why it could be cheaper. The infection vector is actually how we put the malware on someone's computer, whether that's via ad injection or Zeus botnets, or if it's through spam, etc. Traffic acquisition is about how I redivert people to my vector. So the vector is like the actual exploit that we used. In my case, at $500, it was a well-known infection vector. Like this was not a 0-day or whatever. That price varies for the vector that we're using. Acquisition is about how much spam do I try to drive, like how do I get people to that site, whether that's through sending out emails or whatever. And then you also pay for daily traffic. So I'll break down these as we go in a little bit more. But really, it cost me about $6,000 total investment to start this process. So the first thing I'll talk is a little bit about the payload itself. I spent 10 Bitcoin on it. The real thing what I wanted to do is avoid trivial signature detection, right? So there's plenty of desktop agents and whatever that catch known malwares. So I wanted to get around that first. I wanted to be able to get my cryptos in the wild rapidly and get them onto people rapidly. And I also wanted some support, meaning as soon as it was caught by your typical agents, your Symantec's and your McAfee's or whatever, and they added a signature, I wanted to be able to shift the signature to allow it to stay good for longer. So for about $400, or at that time about $1 coin, you can actually just buy a copy of CryptoLocker that's compiled a certain way, but it comes with no support. In my case, I actually was able to contact the developers directly, and they offered me 24/7 support for my code. So for the infection vector, what you'll see here, there's some stuff that'll pop up on the slide. This is directly from the sites that I went to talk a little bit about things that are for sale for the vector, like how do I get so many installs, and you literally pay for it per install, right? You can pay a flat fee for how many of these you want in place. You can rent the botnets to do it. You can rent quality assurance. The key to it all is that it allowed me not to be technical as a creator of this infection. I didn't have to worry about what 0-day I used or whatever. I literally just paid for it as a service. I want 10,000 infected hosts, cost this price, that's all. Then we had to worry about traffic acquisition. And what I learned from the group that I worked with was that there were SEO programmers, which search engine optimization is what SEO is, if you don't know that. That are actually, I would call them somewhat rogue, that will work for anyone. They don't really care what industry they work in. So in the traffic acquisition part, you can literally pay for services that will write you spam emails or phishing emails, if you prefer that term, or fake ads or all kinds of other things to help drive the click-through on your traffic. So you can hire these services, and that's what I did, is hired them for traffic acquisition as part of my campaign. So I didn't have to know anything about it myself either. It really comes out of this commodity programming. As we've globalized, I think everybody here is familiar with outsourcing, especially outsourcing and programming. You know, places all over the world, there are programmers that are doing things for us every day. Those places and countries also feature a lot of real talent, coders and mathematicians and programmers, and they work for pretty cheap, right? That's how we've used them in global economy today in America. The key is that they can be used for all kinds of other things as well, other sorts of programming. And so as we've globalized programming and globalized the concepts of these things, we've actually developed an entire subsystem of programmers and engineers all overseas that have great skill sets. And those things are available both on the open market, as we would make real software for everyday commodity use, as well as on the black market. So I wanted to understand how that happened, right? How did we end up with this globalized economy of programmers and other sorts? And really what I found is it's an economy of scale. Hopefully this slide is clear to you guys, but so my research was all done in Eastern Europe. Ukraine is actually where the folks are that I bought my malware from. Across the bottom, you can actually see some of the ads. If you are not language challenged, you can understand what some of them are. But the key is that even a semi-skilled Ukrainian programmer can make between 5 and 25 times their normal income, which is about 100 to 200 a month, by switching to a business model that's illegal in the US. And the reason I say that is that actually building ransomware is not illegal in all of the countries listed on that chart. They don't look at it as malware because they built it, you used it. Literally a quote from them, and I talked to them through Google Chat, so it's all Google translated. I don't speak Russian or anything like that. But the quote was something like, in America, you can build guns and you're not held responsible when someone uses them poorly. You're just a manufacturer. And that is their perspective on crypto programs and other things like ransomware, is they only sold the program itself. What you did with it was your problem. So that's why it's legal in their country. The same thing's true of all of the other components. So for example, if they run a traffic acquisition site, all it does is traffic acquisition. What you do with that is your problem. So they have a little different perspective on how it works out. But if you think about it in economy of scale, you live in a country where you typically make $200 a month as a programmer, and you have the opportunity to make $2,000 or $5,000 a month as a programmer. I think you're going to go after that job, right? They have the same problems we do. They have to feed their families and pay their mortgages. So that's really how this group of really skilled programmers and other researchers really kind of developed, I think, overseas. When we look at it, what I found is it really closely mirrors the way things work in America around software. At the top, we have technical innovators. These are the folks that are really figuring out new and creative and innovative ways to do things. They're the ones, pushing the envelope constantly. Those things then are taken by these resellers or maintainers. So once you look at like CryptoLocker or CryptoWall, once something like that's created, it moves into the hands of a maintainer after that, like once the base invention's done. And these folks are the ones that are really your main software manufacturers, and whether that be ransomware or otherwise. After the software is really commoditized, it moves into these kind of crime as a service vendors, and that's mostly what I dealt with. Is these are really opportunists that are either using crime as a service or selling crime as a service. And that's the SEO brokers, that's the exploit brokers, it's the whole thing. The key is it's become a commoditized, ritualized industry. It's no longer one person that you're combating. It's not two folks who end up in a basement. Mike and I decide to go rogue and write our ransomware. It doesn't work that way anymore. Now it's actually an army of folks behind them that you're fighting. So what was my return on investment? I showed you that I spent about $6,000. In that time, it was about 10 Bitcoins or 20 Bitcoins in all. Again, not at today's rate. But what I invested in was a guaranteed visitor return of 20,000 visitors, right? And I only paid for 20,000, literally. So interesting that they gave me a direct ROI. My expected infection rate was about 10%, and that was based on the exploit that I purchased. All of the marketing information and things that you do on their sites tell you to expect a payout rate of about 0.5%. Symantec says it's 3%, and the FBI actually says it's closer to 6%. But I built my metrics based on 0.5% payout, expecting not that many people would really pay the ransom. At the time I did it, I expected my ransom to be 1 coin, which was 300 then. And so when you project that out over 30 days, and 90 days is the longest you can expect a ransomware campaign to be effective. After that, the efficiency goes way down because you start to get more into the realm of signature detection and blacklisting. People start to figure out what you're doing and whatever, and it becomes pretty trivial to stop you. So if you just project that out over a 90-day projection, you see I'm making $90,000 a month at these numbers. If the payout rate's higher, if my ransom's higher, if I've targeted somebody, for example, which is all part of the process. My campaign was designed just to throw a net into the water. Whoever I caught, no specific target, no specific company, etc. But those are all options that are available when you begin to do your traffic driving. You could actually target specific companies, specific verticals. The two biggest verticals that were promoted was government and financial. Those were the two that seemed to have the most opportunity to drive targeting at. Targeting a direct individual was pretty expensive, but it was possible. You could actually tag people for bounty in some of the boards, and then they would return that they could infect them. So this would allow you to set your ransom amounts, right? So mine was really meant to be just understand the industry and how it worked, and could I do it without actually knowing anything technical? But if I wanted to get really targeted, I could do that. I could go right after certain kinds of data, certain kinds of files, those sorts of things. So at this point, I think I'm going to hand off to Mike to talk a little bit about how to stop ransomware and how to combat these professional criminals.
Thank you, Jameson. So first, we're going to run through understanding the attacker's mindset and what we're up against out there. We'll then follow along with a high-level overview of different types of resources that are available for preventing ransomware today in our environments. We will discuss prevention appetite, and then I will drop 5 preventative techniques that are easy to deploy and get going with today in helping to reduce our attack surfaces from ransomware and other types of threats out there today. So recently, Casey Smith, you got to click the right button. So recently, Casey Smith and Matt Graber did a talk at Troopers where they talked about enlightened and naive attackers. So in this case, enlightened is attackers that are aware of our defenses and what we have. And so they understand how they need to work to bypass our defenses that we have in place. And then we have our naive attackers, or your more opportunistic ones, who are buying those large spam lists of emails and shipping out millions of emails every day or every week, hoping that they get about 50,000 clicks. That's generally what we're up against, unless it's a targeted campaign that knows how to bypass these different measures. So that's what we're up against. We have our enlightened and our naive. So high level amount of resources are available today. And in this case, we had a group recently, more public group, Florian Roth. He had worked with a couple different people out there today that generated about 16 different ways to help prevent ransomware in your organization. Most obvious ones are kind of the backup and restore processes, making sure you have those things in place. Things that have been around for years, blocking macros, filtering out different types of attachments on your gateway and perimeter, restricting program execution, disabling admin permissions on users, things like that. The Google link here will lead you straight to that spreadsheet. It's a Google spreadsheet that is managed and updated pretty continuously by them, and there's a lot of contributors. Additionally, if you are up against ransomware quite often and you're having a lot of problems with it, multiple vendors have now come out with anti-ransomware tools, and those are referenced right here on this slide deck as well. Malwarebytes, Kaspersky, and a couple others here too. And what this does is it puts canary files on your file systems, and once that canary file is encrypted or changed, modified in a certain way, it will then trigger a block of all those additional writes happening on that system at once. It's a really effective way to prevent ransomware. So something I want to talk about is prevention appetite. Not every organization can implement all 16 things or follow the full CIS guidelines in hopes that they're not going to lock themselves down and block everything in their environment. The issue is we run up against in our organizations is we have developers. They need to be able to build code and do things on their machines to be able to get their job done to continuously make that organization successful. So they can only have so much prevention on their box. Then you have accounting, finance, HR teams, and everyone else out there who needs macros on their spreadsheets or to be able to open up Word docs that are resumes, things like that, right? Everybody needs to be able to open something. Then you have IT. IT and security teams don't like preventative controls on their endpoints because they need to be able to support people who are going to be having those macros on their endpoints. They need to be able to work and support the company. And then your CEO or any type of executive management team, a lot of them don't want preventative controls because they need to be able to log into their machine. It shouldn't be able to lock them out. So at the end of the day, you really have to understand how much prevention can your organization handle? What is your prevention appetite? Will you be able to block everything that happens on endpoints? Are you going to have to go through each class of employee or different departments and understand what they do and how they do it? And then you need to baseline them and then implement your prevention based on that. Not every organization can go full high enforcement, prevent everything. A lot of them can, but not everybody can as well. So at the end of the day, the goal is to make the attackers' jobs hard. We should be making it very, very expensive for them to be able to bypass our prevention controls or even our detection controls, and we should be able to detect them quickly based on that. So 2 ways, most common ways, and this is part of our top 5 prevention here. Most common ways ransomware is getting into organizations is through web. So advertisements or anything like that, click the link in your email, download malicious attachment from the website, or just straight through email indirectly with an attached Word doc that once opened, they enable macros, executes JavaScript file, whatever it might be. These are the 2 areas where you have to focus at. If you have a proxy or gateway, look to make sure there's some kind of prevention. If it comes with some kind of threat feed, it's enabled, it's blocking bad things, or you're adding your own intelligence to your gateways so that these things are blocking more frequently. If it's something manual you have to do, we should try to automate it and make it more automated so these preventative controls are being used to the max. Obviously, when you're using email, there's a lot of different spam gateways out there today. A lot of them are doing the proxy with the URLs and attachment sandboxing. Those things help. And a lot of them can still be bypassed. So that's why you have to have multiple layers, your defense in depth at this layer. So it's not one thing that's getting through. It's, hopefully all these things are getting blocked and one, patient 0. And then you're going to run into every now and then, you'll have one person bring a USB in that they got from somebody at a conference and has ransomware, and you have to deal with that. So the obvious one here with preventing ransomware or any kind of email-borne threat is disabling macros. You have to be able to baseline your organization, understand who needs macros the most. And so with Office 2013, you can disable macros through GPO. So you can disable it globally, or you can separate out workstations or by users, separating who can have macros and who shouldn't, and then educate those who do need it so that they're more aware of clicking anything and everything. So reducing your attack surface with the macro piece is key. Office 2016 will come with macros disabled or has more control over macros in 2016. So it should begin to help organizations much better when it comes to that degree. All right, the more exciting one here. So there's this tool that came out with Microsoft called Microsoft AppLocker. And what I did with AppLocker is I did a bunch of research here at Red Canary. I went through all of our detections, malicious and benign, and I identified the common paths that malware is executing out of. And obviously, when you open up that malicious Word file, that dropped binary that comes from it or gets downloaded from it will execute out of the user's profile. So the cool thing is you can use AppLocker as like a really light prevention tool to be able to prevent those common types of attachments or malicious binaries that are being downloaded. So if the VBE or VB script, anything like that, JS, JSE, all of those you can easily drop into an AppLocker policy and push out to all endpoints, some endpoints, whatever it may be, and then you can begin to prevent them in those specific paths. So the most common path is app data local temp. Probably one of the most prevalent places you'll find all the malicious evil hanging out. Local and app data roaming, things like that. Very, very common places where these things are being dropped. And if you, on the left-hand side of the screen there, you can see what I've created here. This is the exported XML template that I'll provide after this webinar as well. But this template in particular will prevent those from executing within that user's profile. Highly effective. And you obviously can prevent EXEs from those directories as well. There are places where like the WebEx toolbar will execute from them just as like a temporary execution point. So those things are all, you got to be careful because you will begin to prevent business operations from occurring. But this is probably one of the most effective ways to prevent a lot of these things coming down, especially if someone enables the macros. It's going to drop the JS file, execute the JS file. This will prevent that from happening. So it will save you a lot of time. Great tool. Another one is Windows file screening. We've had a lot of success with our customers and at my previous job where we would implement this to be able to monitor and alert on, or monitor, alert, and prevent ransomware encrypting our file servers. So this is another one from Microsoft, Windows file screening. It really is the gatekeeper to preventing mass writes on file servers. So if you have the ability to deploy this, you will save a lot of time of restores and backups and whatever it may be. Prevent this, put this on your file servers, and there are specific key things you can, what it specifically looks for is the key items of the attachments being written to the file system. So if you say the latest variant of ransomware X is using this file extension, you can say prevent it on my file servers. So it does require some monitoring and updating from that degree, but there are a lot of people out there who are doing this, including Florian Roth and team. There's a couple key blog posts that I'll publish as well, where they actually have a PowerShell script to download the latest extensions so that it'll help you guys continuously update and prevent that with file screening. Highly effective. You can actually set it up for emails. It'll email alert you when something mass is happening. Super awesome. Obvious things from that, remove everyone permissions. When one machine gets infected, it'll look for that shared file or shared directories on your file servers and start encrypting it. Get rid of everyone. Lock down your access control list. Not everyone needs to get to the HR drive. Back up and store offline. Storing offline is probably one of the most key things at this point in time. With targeted ransomware attacks that are happening, they are going for your backup servers. Storing your backups offline is one of the most effective ways and best ways to prevent that from happening in your business going out. And obviously one of the most key items here is educating your associates. And I think whether you are implementing a product to help educate, or you're doing the click this in your email to alert IT that there's a phishing campaign going on from every associate, whatever it may be, print some posters, put them up at the watering holes in the office, start sending monthly emails, educating people. It still is your most effective way to educate people and get them to understand what they're doing. Be careful of clicking everything, right? And as you're going through these types of prevention methods, you'll start to get into the business and understand what they're doing and how they're doing it and why they're doing it differently. You might find that not everyone in R&D or wherever may not need macros at all. So you could disable macros. You just saved that much of your attack surface. You just reduced it. And that's the key item here, is make it hard. So your next layer of defense, right? So we went through 5 key items here. Your gateway, whether it's web or email, your macros on any or all endpoints being disabled, implementing App Locker, enabling file screening, and then educating your associates. Each one of these, part of your defense in depth, will help you prevent ransomware along with preventing other types of threats that are out there hitting every organization today. Biggest thing is knowing your environment. Understand what people are doing, baseline them, get your backup strategy straight. If you haven't done a restore in the last 30, 60 quarters, check it out now. Begin to make sure you can actually restore. Consider removing local admin rights. We're seeing success with that. And at the end of the day, begin to look at understanding your vulnerability landscape. If you don't have patch management down, start looking at patch management as well. These are all keys to your defense.
Thanks, Mike, and thanks, Jameson. That was truly fantastic. 2 things I'm really happy that you guys covered. I know I like these subtopics are first, Jameson, you mentioned that it's not essentially 2 people sitting in a basement and, you know, just launching attacks. It's more of like a Sopranos style or more of a crime syndicate. I think we really need the audience and the overall community to know that you're up against these sophisticated attackers. And then Mike talking about awareness, the entire employee population, I think can truly help be defenders. So we want to remind everyone to subscribe to the Red Canary blog, redcanary.com/blog. There's lots of great insights from Mike and people like Jameson. I've written a blog there before too. Lots of just different people contributing great content. So please visit that. We have some time for Q&A. So we'll just dive right into that and then we'll wrap up. So I guess the first question, which is maybe a bit contentious, and maybe I'll start with you, Jameson, but should you pay the ransom if you get hit?
Do you have to? That would be my answer. Overall, philosophically, never. If we drew out the money out of the industry, it would go away. However, the reality is we can't do that, because what if they've encrypted something that is business critical, right? You drop the ball on your defenses, they got through, so you have to. So I really believe the answer is ambiguous, meaning you do what you got to do, but I wish we could never pay them, because it would just go away then, right? If there's no money, there's no more ransomware.
Got it. And then maybe for you, Mike, doesn't a user have to enter the admin password before malware can start encrypting the hard drive, or is that not required?
Generally not required. It's usually once they open that file, that attachment, whatever it is, it'll start encrypting right away. Sometimes the associate will not recognize that it's happening. There will be some performance hit on their box, and then a few minutes later or so, they'll get a different background on their desktop and a pop-up of Notepad telling them that they've been encrypted. Generally really fast, but no password required.
Got it. And then Jameson, how do you see ransomware evolving?
Yeah, I think overall we're really in the infancy of it. Really, I think it probably needs to be relabeled from ransomware into extortionware, because that's what I see next, right? We've seen some big ransoms come out now about DDoS and whatever. The new one that I'm really kind of enlightening people to is 600,000 iPhone users got a ransom note that said, if you didn't pay this, we'll lock your iPhone. And the key was there was no such ability. They could not do it, right? The ransom wasn't real. However, they paid it. So the question is that ransomware or not, right? Like, they paid it. Either way, it worked. So I think the future of it becomes anything that they are able to make us pay for, we will. That's one of the future things. So your television, your power systems, all these things that are in our lives that are electronic, our cars, that's one of the futures of ransomware. And then, I also think that we'll see that industry continue to evolve, not just from what they ransom, but the levels. One of the things I'm watching and tracking now is this service that will determine their ability to pay. So what will you pay for your CEO's laptop versus, an administrative assistant or the mail person or whatever, right? These variable ransoms are becoming a bigger part of the campaigns.
Excellent. And I myself am worried that when they start getting more sophisticated in determining how valuable that asset is, yeah, you're going to see the price go up. And then playing off of what Jameson said, Mike, are these tips applicable? Do these tips help with other kinds of malware that aren't ransomware?
Yes, absolutely. A lot of these techniques will begin to help you to understand and reduce your attack surface. It's just like the CIS guidelines. If you haven't ran through those before, they will lock down machines, change policies. It is generally a very good hygiene practice, right? Knowing your environment, understanding what's there, gaining that situational awareness of where things may be, where your vulnerable applications are on the perimeter, what vulnerable apps are on workstations, things like that. It's just all part of that process. But yeah, absolutely. These will help you prevent many different things outside of just malware. It could even be just standard, adware that could be executing bad things too.
Got it. All right, next one. So what are you guys thinking about map drives? The question is, should you not have map drives, or should they be hidden? Maybe you just have some folder shortcuts. Like any advice around that?
Yeah, from my experience, at least on the side of building the ransomware in the campaign, I don't know if I have any particular feedback on that, Ben, because most of the ransomware that I worked with was about looking for specific types of files, no matter where it found them, right? Like, it's smarter from a detection perspective to only encrypt really important stuff than trying to encrypt everything, right? The malware you read about a lot in the news is like, oh, my whole laptop was locked. That's actually fairly rookie in the deep crime world. I'm more interested in locking all of your Word docs. Or if I'm hitting a consumer, I'm going to lock your pictures, because all the pictures of your child's birth are worth way more to you than your web history, right? So I don't know how that Mike maybe can speak to the technical side of map drives and whatever.
It depends on the organization, really. And the ransomware variant you're dealing with on top of that, because we've seen ransomware where it actually goes and looks out on the network for open shares and begins to encrypt it anyway. So it's kind of both ways. If you understand your file servers or shares that are open on the network, and you're able to lock them down, then maybe not having direct map drives is not a big deal for your organization. But you will end up with those 10, 15 employees who need those map drives, right? Because they're constantly accessing them. They need to be able to get to their Excel files out there. So it just depends. Link would make sense, but what if you run into that variant that finds that file server anyway? So it goes both ways.
Got it. And then continuing on that, so the recommendations you guys just provided, how much do those apply to the targeted attacks, or I think before it was called enlightened versus naive? And the question goes on to say, I've heard more and more about attackers using very sophisticated methods to infect an organization and then encrypt as many boxes as they can at once.
Yeah, I'll do the business kind of side of that first. A targeted attack campaign is much more expensive because you're paying for the intel about that company and the attacks. Few of the campaigns that I was exposed to were, did the people who launched the campaign do the reconnaissance, right? So they paid for it. So if you just think about how would you do targeted marketing today, if you were a real company, who would you pay and how would you know what vertical to go after? Very similar in the black market. And then the attacks themselves, the level of sophistication really has more to do with how badly I want them, right? Do I really want to hurt that company or that person, or am I really just looking for a dollar figure, right? So that's what it comes down to. It becomes an economic question, and that's why this hygiene is so important, is if you make it more expensive, it makes it harder for them to target you.
Yep, got it. And being able to detect them at that degree, right? So if your perimeter servers are vulnerable, you have a vulnerable JBoss server on your perimeter and it gets compromised, and they begin to, they gain credentials, they escalate their privileges, spread laterally, find all the boxes they want to encrypt and go from there. That's when you need detection, right? You need to be able to monitor your environment for that suspicious behavior. And that kind of falls right into like what Red Canary does. We do monitoring and response for organizations. And so we would begin to detect this behavior happening on a single box, multiple machines being spread laterally, a scheduled task being dropped into 40 plus machines, and then all of a sudden encryption occurs. We want to be able to detect that actor the moment they compromise that web server and execute who am I.
I think that's a key, Ben, that Mike just said, is that In none of these cases do they just come at random at you. They have done reconnaissance. Somebody has. And if you can detect it at that stage, that's really where you want to be before they're trying to encrypt. And like once they're at the point of dropping the payload for encryption, we're kind of late in the game.
Yep, great points. So let's continue to run with that. So you know, and a bunch of these questions have multi-parts, so I'll try to try to slice and dice them. You know, what I guess from the commercial products perspective, and maybe you both can comment on this. You know, what are you seeing out there that you like, or is it really just around IT hygiene?
It's going to be a mix because no product will solve all your problems. Nothing is a silver bullet. We always say that. But having those multiple layers in place is going to be the piece that saves you. Having multiple prevention controls in place, as much as you guys can appetite, and then also having as much detection as possible, right? Prevention is great, but we can't prevent everything, and detection's a must. We have to be able to detect it. So as far as like a specific product, the industry is constantly evolving on the mail gateway side, right? And there's so many different ways, and every day it's changing because you're constantly seeing blog posts from Proofpoint and other, you know, Mindcasts and whatnot talking about this new variant. Well, that new variant probably bypassed them. They now prevent it today, but tomorrow's next variant is going to be different, and that's going to be a new bypass that they're going to have to work and change to be able to prevent it tomorrow. So think about if your mail gateway is being bypassed, what other layers do you have in place for that tomorrow to be able to prevent that? So it's not just a single product out there that can prevent it.
And are you largely just seeing blacklisting, or is there other techniques that are involved here?
Yeah, a lot of the sandbox techniques are obviously really popular, whether it's on the mail or website. It's a mix, right? And obviously there's like, you can use a product like CV protection and be able to, you know, blacklist or whitelist whatever happens on endpoints up to URL rewriting on the click side. So it's just a wide mix of black and whites.
So a lot of what you guys talked about, and I think rightfully so, was showing some Microsoft mitigations or different tools. But can you speak a little bit to Mac or Android or Linux? You know, if an environment mostly has Macs, are they okay?
Well, yeah, from my perspective, being able to purchase the kits and everything else, the fastest growing segment there is actually Android. Windows malware kits and whatever are pretty well known. There's a lot of code base out there for that. That's, you know, a pretty known thing. Macs are still a kind of micro segment of the economy, but if you think about everywhere that Android OS is used in phones and televisions and right in media devices all over the world, that particular segment is by far, from a money and chatter perspective, the largest on the dark web right now. Everybody is focused on compromising Android and ransoming it.
Wow, that's very fascinating. Guess we all got to be careful of our phones, right? So going back to something else that you guys talked about, you know, how the criminals essentially justified their existence by saying, well, hey, we can make guns, but you know, we're not the ones doing the crime. But obviously someone is launching the attack and extracting the money and converting it to actual currency or whatever. Any comments on, you know, how they're getting away with it, or, you know, maybe how Bitcoin's involved or some of that stuff?
Yeah, well, all cryptocurrencies have allowed us to obscure the process a little bit. You know, we can trace amounts and whatever to wallets, but tracing the wallet to an individual becomes a little bit more of a difficult enterprise. We see that in common law enforcement today. Anybody who's really interested should just look up cryptocurrency and its history and how it came about and how it's used. And unquestionably, that's a big driver that made ransomware explode, was the availability and simplicity of cryptocurrency. Like Amazon takes it today. So I know that some of the laundering mules that were previously part of ransomware, until there was really a cryptocurrency boom, had all the trouble because they would buy gift certificates to different places and like launder the money in that way. And now that they have it as Bitcoin, it can be moved about pretty simply, right? Like the coins can be transferred from wallet to wallet. I can actually literally use them at some stores. Like it just, suddenly they just were almost a legitimized business by the availability of the commerce that they used.
Got it. So we'll take a few more questions. So if anyone else has questions, we got a few more, but feel free to submit them before we wrap up. So what about, are you guys seeing or have you heard any stories around internal, essentially insider threat where insiders are actually trying to use ransomware or anything around that?
I would say if we drop the word where from that, Ben, it's been true since the dawn of time. We call it extortion, blackmail. This industry, that's part of what I like to stress to people when I do my talks is disconnect your mind from the technical side of this and remember what it really is. Is it extortion and blackmail, right? And how we fight it technically is one question, but how do we fight it philosophically is another, right? It's very similar.
Makes perfect sense. Hey, Mike, how about, you guys talked a lot about, web and email as infection vectors, and Jameson, feel free to add as well. Are you seeing actual servers, encrypted and held for ransom, or is it largely, desktops and laptops?
Seeing both at this point, right? So whether it's a perimeter server or, we do hear about Linux ransom or extortion happening on perimeter Linux boxes. Obviously, workstations are just the ground zero point for a lot of these things, but servers are obviously super, super common.
Got it. So as we start to wrap up here, a couple more questions. So I guess, first of all, when we start to pivot back to sort of the advice or what people can do, where do you start? Some of the people maybe on this call, I'm sure there's experts on the call, but there's also maybe people that are just a little bit newer to ransomware or to cybersecurity. When you have an environment and you say, I want to protect us against ransomware, where do you start?
I would start with identifying what's really valuable to me. Right? What is the core of the business? Just like you would in any business continuity exercise, right? What assets here, what data is so important that we would pay the ransom? Start with that, right? And make that the core of your defense. I'm not saying not to defend the other things. I mean, put your money where your money is, right? Defend those things as tightly as you can. Active monitoring has to be part of it because if you can head off the ransomware while they are figuring out who you are and what defenses you have, you won't have to worry about the infection vector as much, right? So kill the scouts, kill the reconnaissance, and decide what's important to you. That makes it more expensive for them.
Yep, that's a great point. I mean, finding those, I think we call them crown jewels, right? And knowing where your data is, the most important data to the business. Those are, obviously the key items to focus on, and then work your way out, right? Who's the biggest clicker in the organization? Who's opening all the Word docs every day? Who's opening spreadsheets every day with macros? And then you start to build it out and understand, where things are. Get that baseline going.
Great advice. I like that. I think you said put the money where the money is or something like that. But and then following on that, because a lot of what you guys suggested either through your answers afterward or during the actual presentation was around different, IT policies or different settings within, maybe Active Directory or Windows itself. Can you give a little bit of some tips or some takeaway of how to better bring security and IT together, since IT would be more involved in some of those mitigations?
Yeah, absolutely. So obviously the biggest thing, if you're a lone security guy in an IT world, you want to approach IT and work with them side by side, because a lot of the controls you want to implement could potentially make more work for them and to them to be able to support, right? And so generally what I do is, obviously you come to them and show them what you want to do and implement within the organization, bring some level of metrics on what this may prevent. So if you have any previous metrics from like a SIM or any kind of things you're tracking in a help desk ticketing system, security related incidents, take all of that, try to get as much data as possible from past incidents, build it all together and show them factually that If we implement these app locker policies, it will prevent these last 20 help desk tickets and all the ones that may potentially come in the next month. Those things are super beneficial to be able to show people. And like I mentioned on the slide deck for App Locker, that whole thing right there was just research over time, everything that Florian Roth and guys had provided, built that out in App Locker. It's now an easily imported XML file into Active Directory. You can get going with it sort of tomorrow at that degree. But it's all more just making sure you understand and being able to show them, factual information and how you guys can prevent these things better. And I mean, obviously starting off with just a small pilot group, it could be 10 people, 5 people, and just to start to show the value of these prevention controls and how easy they are and how much less administrative overhead there's going to be and whatnot.
I would extend that a little bit too, Ben. I would say that it's important to even wrap that into the business continuity question for the management further up, right? It's not just the metric of these many tickets or whatever. That operational efficiency is really important. But if you take it to the higher level and say, by protecting these assets this well, by doing these sort of measures, we can help prevent these sorts of ransoms, which cause these sorts of business disruptions, right? Because this is really a business continuity question, even more so than a standard kind of crime, continuity discussion.
Great points. Yeah, I think if the audience takes away, you got to get IT involved, you got to get the executives involved, but also you don't have to go across your entire environment at once. I think that's one problem that most security teams run into is they almost try to solve too much of the problem, or at least attack too much of the problem, versus, like you said, maybe starting with 10 machines or something like that. So awesome stuff. One last question just came in, and then we'll wrap up. I'll try to paraphrase it a little bit. When people are looking at this problem, or when companies are looking at this problem, is there any data or any way for them to essentially self-assess or look up like, hey, I'm at this much risk, like I'm a mom and pop shop or I'm a big company? Like, is there any way for these organizations to determine if they're more or less vulnerable to this?
I would say the question you have to ask yourself if you're a business owner or business leader is, what data do I have that if it were deleted or exposed to the world would damage my business? And if you have an answer of yes to any of those questions, you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Yep, got it. All right. Well, we got to wrap up here. So to the audience, thank you so much. I want to thank such an all-star team, Mike Hague and Jameson Utter, working for Red Canary and Senrio, 2 great companies that I personally have a lot of belief in. And so really thank you to the audience for attending. This will be available afterward. Please stay in touch. Thank you to Red Canary for sponsoring this, redcanary.com/blog. And until next time, for Mike and Jameson, I'm Ben Johnson, and thank you for attending today's webinar on ransomware.